بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
How we view science versus how we view religion. So let's start reading, inshallah ta'ala. Natural causation is the regular, here we start on page 30. The author, Hafidhahullah ta'ala, wa nafa'ana Allah bi'ulumihi fi ad-darain, he says, natural causation is the regular association of contingent causes and their contingent effects by God. So that's some of these words are big words. Natural causation, right? So natural causation, I think everybody should know what that means, right? Cause and effect, right? So that's natural cause. Unnatural cause is what we do, right? That's not natural, right? Natural causation is automated cause and effects in existence, in nature. Is the regular association. This is interesting, right? Remember when we talked about customary impossibilities versus like logical impossibilities? So regular association are customary associations. For example, fire burns. That is a customary association. It isn't impossible for fire not to burn. If God willed, God could create fire that doesn't burn. Is that clear? So the association between fire and the effect of burning, although for us, when we observe it, it's cause and effect, right? But this cause and effect that we're observing is God's creation. He created fire, and He created the cause of effect that associated with fire. Right? Fire in of itself doesn't have the power to burn. Rather, it's something that God has enabled it to do and enables the effect to happen. Is that clear? Separating the two? So we're looking at things beyond just how they operate in the natural world. We're looking at them beyond the natural function of these things. Who made them function like that? Right? Because they're contingent things. Contingent things cannot do things of their own. Right? We talked about that abundantly, right? Contingent things cannot do things of their own accord. They have to be made to do these things. Who made them do these things? It's God. What we observe is just a regular association. But because we observe this association time and time and time and time again, we describe it as cause and effect. But in reality, that's relative. That's relative to human experience. It's the cause and effect. But when we look at it objectively, nobody's causing it except God. Right? And nobody's creating the effect but God. There's no other creator but God. So God is creating the cause and He's creating the effect. Right? And so that's the objective perspective on things. And the relative perspective for us as human beings is we see things, this is how the world operates. Right? But this world operating is just God's power manifesting itself in the ways that it manifests itself. Does that make sense so far? Right? So that is why he said natural causation is a regular association. Right? It's just this regular association between this thing and that thing of contingent causes, right? Be it fire, be it whatever, and their contingent effects by God, be it the quality of burning. So we're going to get into a bit of detail, and he's going to elaborate on this, inshallah ta'ala. I hope for the folks online on the Zoom. The advantage for those on Zoom versus those on YouTube is the Zoom folks, you get to ask questions and interact and interject. So feel free to speak up and ask questions. For those of you on YouTube, please enroll for the class so that you can join us through the Zoom meetings. And also so that you may be able to ask questions and receive a copy of the book. All right, let's continue, inshallah. We'll dive into some more detail about this. Your smartphone is contingent. All right, here he gets a bit, advanced with this example of technology. But we'll read it, inshallah, for the purpose of this lesson. He says, what exactly happens when you send a message to your friend on your smartphone? Does touching your smartphone cause the message to be sent, or is it God that is sending that message, coincidentally creating it on your friend's smartphone when you touch your own smartphone? We'll read a bit more. If you reflect on the argument from contingency, you will see that it is God that is sending that message. You will see that He is the one who lights up the pixels of your smartphone. He is the one who creates the electronic signals when you touch the screen. He is the one that moves those currents through the integrated circuits. He is the one who creates the electromagnetic waves that leave the phone, and at the end, He is the one who creates all of those things as the message that you typed up on your smartphone, appears on the screen of your friend's smartphone. The argument goes like this. Fact 1. The lights in the smartphone's pixels, the electrical signals in its integrated circuits, and the electromagnetic waves that leave its transmitter all exist contingently. They all exist what? Contingently. Something had to make them the way that they are, right? They couldn't have created themselves. They couldn't have made themselves the way that they are. Something had to choose for electricity to work the way that it does, magnetic waves to work the way that it does, for information or signals to be transferred in that pattern. Something had to make it function in this way. It's contingent, so it's a contingent being. So we're establishing that it is contingent. Fact 2: everything that exists contingently needs a necessary being to make it exist. Therefore, the lights, the electrical signals, and the electromagnetic waves need a necessary being to make them exist. The smartphone and everything associated with it are contingent. If God hadn't made them exist, nothing would have happened. The pixels wouldn't light up, the electric signals wouldn't exist, and there would be no electromagnetic waves. Before the age of smartphones, the Prophet Ibrahim, before we move on, I guess we can move on. He's going to give us another example here. Before the age of smartphones, the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi said the same. He said that God, the necessary being on whom all contingent things depend, is the one who created me, and it is He who guides me, who gives me food and drink, and when I am ill, it is He who cures me, who will cause me to die and then to life again, and who I hope will forgive my faults on the Day of Judgment. This is in Surah Al-Shu'ara, الَّذِي خَلَقَنِي فَهُوَ يَهْدِينِ وَالَّذِي هُوَ يُطْعِمُني وَيَسْقِينِ وَإِذَا مَرِضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِينِ وَالَّذِي يُمِيتُنِي ثُمَّ يُحْيِينِ وَالَّذِي أَطْمَعُ أَنْ يَغْفِرَ لِي خَطِيئَتِي يَوْمَ الدِّينِ. So, he continues with another concept or example to further drive this point. Before I continue on to the next section, how do we feel about this so far? Is it clear? Are we clear? Everybody? Contingency? Online, Zoom folks? How are we doing with what we've read so far? All right? Okay. Good. Okay, alhamdulillah. Pavlov's dogs. So Pavlov is a very famous scientist, psychologist, always speak about the study he did with his dogs. If you took Psych 101 in college, you'll probably have already read this famous example or this famous test. He says here, if God is the one who creates everything, then why do we find ourselves thinking that when we touch our smartphone, we are the ones who are causing the message to be sent? And how do we make sense of the science lessons in which we learn how a touchscreen turns the pressure of our fingers into electronic signals, which are carefully routed through integrated circuits to the smartphone's transmitter, which turns them into electromagnetic waves? The answer to these questions is found in an experiment conducted by the Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov in the late 1800s. Pavlov noticed that when dogs see food, they begin drooling. He wondered if he could fool the dogs into thinking that the ringing of a bell causes food to appear. So, as he presented his dogs with food one day, he rang a bell and found that the dogs drooled. As he presented them with food the next time, he again rang a bell and again observed that the dogs drooled. He continued doing that for a long time. Every time he presented his dogs with food, he would ring a bell, and every time the dogs would drool because they were expecting food. Then one day, he rang the bell but didn't present them with food. What do you think he found? That's right. He found that the dogs began drooling at the mere sound of the bell, even though there was no food in sight. Pavlov discovered what psychologists now call classical conditioning. Very famous term, right, in psychology, classical conditioning. And then they have the opposite, which slips my mind right now, but or the second type of conditioning. But classical conditioning is the idea that you associate one thing with another thing, and so eventually the person connects these two things together, although there's actually no connection between them. But you just repeat it enough times to the point that the person, when they see this, they believe this happens. This is very common with trauma. If a person is traumatized or has PTSD, right, they've heard loud noises, guns, bombs, so on, and they've experienced extreme fear, death, life-threatening, so on and so forth. They've heard that enough times and have been experienced to intense loud noises and intense moments of fear. Now, every time they hear a loud bang, their heart races, and they've been conditioned to fear every loud bang because of their trauma. It's a form of conditioning. That's how the human brain works. When something is repeated enough times, or if something is repeated intensely, our brain associates that old outcome with that cause, even though there's no actual direct association between the two, right? And so that is classical conditioning. Trauma is a form of a type of conditioning to the brain. And so to undo or get treatment for trauma is to unlearn that, right? To teach the brain to unlearn those fears that, hey, loud noises don't mean your life is at risk, right? Or whatever, being alone in a dark space doesn't mean something bad is going to happen to you. Whatever else it might be that a trauma that a person carries. The brain has to unlearn that because we are, as human beings, conditioned by what we observe in life, regardless of the true cause and effect that they share. There was a question here. Yes?
So you basically answered it.
Okay, great.
If that same trauma has been applied by using the Quran, traumatize a person saying, hey, Allah is punishing God. Burn the words into them. And then every time, like, the prayer call comes on, say this person, anonymous, they're like, oh, God, every time they read the Quran, it's like, oh, trigger, they go back into that place. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, anything can be associated with a bad effect. It all depends on how it's used, right? If I use religion to punish people, and that's how I justify religion, then what happens? You're traumatized. You associate religion with torture, with pain, with abuse, with oppression, so on and so forth, right? And that is why, us as Muslims, we believe that the West has this kind of collective trauma about religion, because religion was the cause for the Dark Ages. It was one of the main tools. Religion was used to enslave black people because they were found inferior, and that if they believed in God, they would be freed, right? So religion was used to create so much evil and oppression. So that is why there's this traumatic response right now in Western, societies to religion, because of how religion was used to prevent people from learning. So now when Westerners think of religion, right, your Western white kind of society culture is that religion is this thing that prevents people from learning, that is racist and discriminates, that is used to terrorize people, that is used to prevent people from education, that is used to exploit people for wealth. And now, so religion is this evil thing they don't want. It's a bad thing. It's a form of collective trauma, right? And for Muslims, we don't share that. Our perspective on religion is completely the opposite. Religion was what empowered us and propelled our greatest achievements and our well-being and spiritual, physical, mental, and so on and so forth, right? So our scientific achievements and advancements all happened when we were at the peak of religion. So very opposite. This is a form of conditioning.